In content marketing, sometimes you just need someone to make sense of it all. In this series, we're joined by industry leaders sharing their tips, advice, and expert knowledge on what good content is and does. Our latest episode sees Collective Content MD Tony Hallett have a sit-down interview with Infosys Knowledge Institute Associate Vice President Samad Masood, making sense of AI, content marketing metrics, and more. From our studio in London, this is the Collective Content Podcast.
So this is our latest in our CC Events series where we go deep with a prominent content leader at the kind of company that we're used to working with. Today's guest is Samad Masood. Samad, really great to welcome you here today. Looking forward to learning about you, your views, your career, all that good stuff. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
And
Well, like I said, we're glad to have you here, and we're going to dive straight in with the personal stuff. Just a little bit about your career, your background. I know you play five-a-side. I know you've told me about like pubs with good food and all that sort of thing. So you live like London. I believe you like London. You've seen the world, and I want to get actually straight into your background because you, like a lot of people I know, started off as a journalist working at some titles that I knew back in the day, the sort of Infoeconomies, computer wires of this world. Became an analyst, you went to Accenture, and you've ended up where you are now. But tell us about those early days, first of all. Is it
I think route? I mean, the thing that's I have to always mention is that I didn't grow up in the UK. I grew up in Southeast Asia. I was an expat kid, and but you know, I was always sort of I suppose I was a British foreigner in a way. I came to the UK in the 90s for uni, and when I graduated, sort of just landed in a job as a journalist. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I landed a job as a journalist and took it from there. And I was very lucky early on to have been mentored by some very. I mean, my first year was mentored by a real old Fleet Street hack, who, you know, literally had been employed by the publishing company to shout at young people. And in those days,
a great tactic, a great learning curve.
Yes, those days it was legal, and you know, but it really gave me a grounding in writing and news reporting. You know, I had to do daily news reports, weekly newsletters, and a couple of features for a magazine. So, you know, the proper, you know, kind of, and it's always been B2B, you know, or trade journalism. And then I was very, you know, I started on a risk magazine, or an offshoot of risk magazine, and really wasn't that into financial services. And luckily, you know, in those days, I was the youngest on the team. So they said, oh, you write the internet page.
Okay.
You know, like we say to people, oh, you do the social media bit, or you know, you give the young person that sort of thing. And that led me to a job at Infeconomy, writing for Information Age and Infoeconomist. And after a few years, you know, I think there's an interesting line that goes from my early training and learning as a journalist through my corporate experience. I was always really interested in telling, you know, the actual story, and what I found was an interesting story. And what became frustrating with journalism was that, you know, for all of our high principles, the fact was that we weren't always encouraged to write the most interesting story. We were encouraged to write the most surprising story, or the thing that was going to get someone, you know, get someone to read, or now increasingly click. So I guess it was old school sort of clickbait, and I felt like, you know, I really wanted to go deep on some of these issues, particularly because it was trade journalism. And I have to say, I've always been fascinated with how businesses work, the challenges they face, and such. So that then led me from journalism. I got a job on Computer Wire, which was then owned by Data Monitor, and that was kind of a nice stepping stone for journalists because it was owned by an analyst firm, but still had a very kind of news reporting
Yeah,
ethic.
yeah, I remember. I know. I think we're those people that when you look at each other up on LinkedIn, you've got dozens of people in common
Yes.
that actually don't
Yeah.
know each other that well.
Yeah.
And I think that starts in that era.
I was lucky. I was lucky to kind of just get the tail end of that era, and you know, yeah, there's a large network of those people who kind of, it was that, you know, you experienced it as well, that shift to the internet that we were all kind
And
of
an exciting
finding.
time to
Yeah.
be a journalist or an analyst or just following the businesses and doing things then. So
Yeah.
so tell me, so that journalist to analyst move, that was helped by being within that same umbrella organization?
It was because the critical thing that really changed things for me was that when I was at ComputerWire, we worked on something called the Global Computing Services newsletter, and our main product, we would spend the morning writing news stories, and then we'd spend the afternoon like scanning the internet for press releases on IT outsourcing contracts, and then
Right.
we'd have to then input those IT outsourcing contracts, the details, into a spreadsheet. And by the end of it, that was like a multi-thousand row spreadsheet that now makes a lot of money, or still makes them a lot of money.
Wow.
But, you know, after 6 months, you could have asked me any question. You could have given me 2 or 3 points of data on an IT outsourcing contract, and I could probably have guessed, you know, the vendor, the services, the cost, the price, the duration. You know, it just like gave me this year of real in-depth understanding of the IT services industry.
Yeah.
And so I moved from writing about software to services, and that, long story short, led to a job at Accenture, sort of supporting their research team.
Okay. And I think I first came across your name back in your analyst days, and we would get through the classic sort of research notes, and I
Yes.
remember your name from that. And then I think I knew of you going to Accenture, so please
Yeah.
also tell us about that.
Yeah.
And then how it's kind of come full circle to us knowing each other now. But so,
Yeah.
so what happened there?
So I was doing more analyst stuff, and I really enjoyed that because, you know, to be frank, you got to stand up in front of people and tell people what you thought. You know, as a journalist, you were always encouraged, or I was always encouraged, you know, you're not there to share your opinion. You've got to find
Right.
people.
Ask other people.
Ask other
Yeah.
people, and
Yeah.
sometimes you had to prompt them with your opinion in order to get them to say the things you wanted them to say, and then you had to find someone to disagree with that opinion. And you know, it's all above board and such, but it was sort of felt to me like a really long way round doing what I really wanted to do, which was tell people what I thought about what was going on. And the analyst world was ideal for that. And you know, as an analyst, you're given your beat. And you meet lots of people, you forecast the market size, you write about it, and it was really great fun. And I got some experience basically standing up in front of boards, private equity firms, you know, quite senior people, and advising them on my view of the market. And I realized then that actually you didn't have to be particularly smart to convince, to kind of, you know, impress people with what you knew.
Go on.
All it was really was that, you know, these people are very busy, and they don't have the time
Yeah.
to, you know, you've had months and months to research a beat and build an opinion, and even if you don't have much of an opinion, they still value what you've learned. And so, you know, it gave me more of a confidence to kind of have faith in what I thought about things, because and this goes back to my journalist days. I've always had a bit of anyone who knows me from those days, I was that guy who always asked an annoying question, always asked an additional question when everyone wanted to go for lunch. And, you know, people would come up to me afterwards and you know, give me dirty looks. Like, please stop asking these questions, annoying. But I had this view that, and often I'd ask questions, very basic questions, because I just didn't understand what people were saying. And I think there's another realization there from journalism. You can't write down the jargon someone gives you. Your editor will just throw it out.
Yeah.
You go, if you don't understand. So you have to ask someone, what does leverage mean? You know, what do you mean when you say that?
I can say it means nothing. I
Look,
just like to say it right
exactly,
now.
you know,
Don't say leverage.
you know,
And you're being very humble, but what you're talking about is it makes a lot of sense to then telegraph how you've ended up where you are now.
Yeah.
So to talk about ending up at Infosys, and you are at a particular part of the company, and please tell us all about it. So shortened to IKI, but tell us about the Infosys Knowledge Institute.
Yeah, well, we prefer the Infosys Knowledge Institute actually, but obviously the shortened version is easier a lot of the time. But yeah, Infosys So I'd spent a few years at Accenture on thought leadership, but then moved into doing some other things where I was able to work with fintech startups. I set up a kind of open innovation program in the UK for Accenture and did a lot of things. And then I had kids
Right.
and was sort of thinking, can I maintain this kind of client-facing consulting kind of role? Because it's a lot of effort. And Infosys came along at that point, and they had set up the Infosys Knowledge Institute, and
Okay.
I think if you think about where Infosys is as a company, they are 40 years old now, really one of the pioneers of the Indian IT
Mm-hmm.
industry,
Yep.
the outsourcing and services industry, and they're now in the top tier. They're one of the top 4 or 5 IT services companies globally.
Mm-hmm.
Up there with Accenture and EY and Deloitte and IBM and such. And I think they felt it was time. The chairman Nandan Nilekani certainly felt it was time that they had an official thought leadership arm, that sort of ivory tower style
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
Um, and I met the guy Jeff Kavanagh, who is put in the position to set it up. I think after about 4 to 6 months, I had joined, and they'd got the basics in place. But I think what was really useful is that I had brought publishing experience
Mm-hmm.
and the experience of working in and running research teams.
Yeah.
So actually, while my Accenture experience has helped in many other ways, it's helped in understanding how the consulting
Yeah.
business works, how the client side works. Actually, most of what I'm applying at the Infosys Knowledge Institute comes from my days at Ovum and ComputerWire
Well, I was going to say
and
that publishing
yeah.
experience. So there are parallels for this at other. So if we talk about we tend to talk about the big GSIs. So the
Mm.
sort of it's I'm not going to name all your competitors, but a grouping of say somewhere
Yeah,
between 20 and 35 big
sure.
companies that everyone in tech knows, just like they know Infosys, and those companies have tried different things over the years,
Mm,
different sort of versions of the ivory tower, but really smart people
mm,
saying really smart things who don't always have a publishing background. So
mm.
you have the analyst background and the publishing background,
Yeah,
and you've brought that in.
yeah.
So talk a little
I
bit more
just don't
about.
have the smart bit, is what you're saying. Yeah, I fully agree.
No, shut up with
Yeah,
that. That's so you've spoken to me at different times
yeah,
about the models different companies have to
yeah,
make this work.
yeah.
One of the areas we're moving on to is about the measurement of the results of this
Mm,
kind of work,
mm,
and we're inevitably going to speak about AI a bit later as well. But how do you then approach that? So if you're justifying budget, if you're trying to show results, and like
mm,
this is the way, um, how do you go about that? And I know we've even talked about a book which is quite recent and quite
mm.
prominent. If you want to bring that into the
Yeah,
conversation,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, certainly. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in what you're
Mm,
saying there, and I think you know, I'll start with the ivory tower thing. I think a lot of organizations are challenged because with thought leadership because they or challenged by it because they do see it as the ivory tower stuff, and they see it as, oh, this needs to be really really smart. We need, and in a way I feel like uh many organizations aim too high too fast,
huh.
right? In that
Okay.
they are trying to, they want to be so good. They want to be that one report that everyone emails around, and everyone talks about. But we're talking here about the top 1% of things that get published, if not less,
Yeah.
right? Um, I mean, you look at a great organization in the industry like McKinsey, which is world renowned for what it publishes. You actually look through everything they publish. There's still only a fraction of it that really is that well known. And they do a great
Hmm.
job of what they're doing and have been doing it, ever since they started. They've been doing that. It's the mainstay of their marketing and their branding.
Hmm.
So, I think, to your point about, how do you make sure that you keep getting fed, and get budget and things like that?
Yeah.
In any large corporate, there are multiple stakeholders, and I think Infosys is in that top tier of extremely large global companies in which there are more stakeholders than you can count, and you need to focus and target yourself while also ensuring you're in some way creating some clear value for all of those critical people that you need to. Now, in a smaller organization, or maybe an organization, and I'm not even talking that small, I mean, like I say, Infosys, Accenture, these firms are a whole nother level of size, right?
Yeah.
A lot of those IT firms, those top 20, many of those, you're going to quite middling sized businesses, and of course it's all in perspective, but where you might only have a handful of stakeholders, but you've got to identify those stakeholders, identify the different things that drive them and what they're interested in, and then so much of it is clear, concise messaging internally that you have to keep repeating, because a lot of people don't, they sort of shrug and go, what are you doing here? Why are you even here? What are you doing for me?
So what you're saying is that the internal comms is vital, really, to really prove that you're doing the good work. What are some of the other things you would advise around making that ROI argument internally?
I think it depends on your organization, obviously, but I have always been, because I accidentally landed in writing, I was never really convinced anyone was reading anything I was putting out there. And I just thought it was all, kind of laughable to think people were reading it.
I feel like you're going to say until.
Yes.
Okay, go on. Okay. Give myself a point for that.
And actually, I think I've put a lot of effort, and we've put a lot of effort in the Infosys Knowledge Institute at tracking the performance of our content.
Right.
And you can call it content performance marketing, or you can call it content marketing, but we've certainly taken a lot of elements of that approach and fed that into how we track the impact of our content. So a lot of our discussions internally are both to our own team members and our stakeholders, are to say, look, this is how it's performing. This is how we can increase it, and this can improve it. And I think we're in a very fortunate position that because of Infosys' strong brand and reach, that we do get a lot of readers and we get a lot of views, and we're able to cut that and see how many of those are coming from client organizations.
Right.
And I feel in Infosys, we've become part of the journey with marketing to develop more content marketing, more content performance, while also having a very thought leadership-led approach to choosing the topics, understanding how you write something in a quality way, how you don't just mimic what people are saying, but try and bring some new angle to the story. And I think, as I mentioned a bit earlier, you can be in a large organization and people will often just not know what you really do, or why you're there. And so that internal comms, whether it is on the data side or on the performance side, my recommendation to anyone is make sure that people in your organization know what value you're bringing and prove that value. And unfortunately, unless you're one of the world's best writers of thought leadership, your content alone is not going to be enough, because everyone has an opinion on content, right? Everyone has an opinion, and everyone can read a piece of content and go, oh, well, I wouldn't put it that way. Or I wouldn't have said that. Oh, you forgot to mention this. It's subjective.
Yeah, I'm being particularly quiet at this point because I think we've absolutely got one of the great sound bites from this interview. and I know some of your peers who would end up listening to this, I think they will recognize what you're saying there. I wanted to ask about two things. So we've talked before about thought leadership and content marketing, and there's an old colleague of mine who put a piece up a few weeks back on the internet about saying he thinks they're sort of quite separate. And content marketing, we always talk at the agency about it being a process. It's not about a specific type of content. It's normally with the result, and the result on a good day being a sale, and it can even be B2C, but normally being something like a lead at the end of a process. And thought leadership feels like quite a rarefied, difficult thing to do. Not everyone can do it. But you see them both as part of the same equation.
I think Charles's piece was Charles, wasn't it? His piece really, what I agree with is that your thought leadership shouldn't be led by your content performance strategy.
Right.
But I think your content performance strategy can be led or highly influenced by your thought leadership
Yeah,
strategy. And
yeah.
that's what we're doing at Infosys, and it's working very well. We work very closely with the digital marketing team on that, and we're advising each other on
Yeah.
this. They can see that our content does better than the content that others are putting out.
And that's key, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's, yeah.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
we're delivering good metrics for them, and they're
Yeah.
helping us deliver good metrics
Yeah,
for
yeah.
ourselves. I think when you mentioned the rarefied element, right,
Mhm.
where I sort of disagree with Charles, if I've interpreted what he's saying correctly, is that, you know, the ivory tower rarefied content bit, as I've mentioned before, I feel like you're fighting a losing game there, because I think any one of us could get noticed by writing something extremely provocative, timely, opinionated. The problem is if you're writing it for a corporation, and which has multiple stakeholders, multiple clients at different stages of relationship and conversation, you've got to ask yourself, how do you come up with a really, really interesting topic that doesn't in some way offend someone, or ruin some conversation that's
Right, right.
happening, or paint the wrong picture, that, and the larger the firm, the more of these potential issues.
Yeah.
And Charles puts in his piece, actually at the end he concludes, you've got to let the leaders lead.
Right.
But we've got great leaders. They're not all thought leaders. They're not all the sort of people who can turn all of their great experiences into a pithy article that grabs people and shocks people, right? And in fact, many of them are leaders because they've been very diplomatic, and they've not been,
Right.
those sort of things. So they've had great attributes that means that, they wouldn't be the kind of, be able to kind of come up with narratives that are really surprising
Yeah.
or shocking, although they have very smart stuff. So it's kind of
Yeah,
helping
true.
them. I think it's sort of, there are very few firms, I feel, where you can align a very, very shocking, unique, new,
Sure,
different
sure.
narrative
Yeah.
that everyone agrees with.
Right, right.
You know, um,
Okay.
and it's difficult to have the freedom to do that often.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think we probably need to tip our hat to Charles Cooper and put a link to his article in the notes to this episode.
Yeah.
And Cooper, if you ever listen to this, we'd love to get you on the show as well sometime to discuss this. Last thing I wanted to say about ROI conversation. So you put me on to these guys and this book. I've nothing in it to promote this book. But Cindy Anderson and Anthony Marshall, you shared a panel with them, I think, one time.
Yes, yeah,
and-
I've met them a few times. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's an IBM link in there somewhere. I should probably say that.
Yeah, Cindy and Anthony head up the Institute for Business Value at IBM, and they've been doing this sort of stuff a long time. And I was very impressed with the book. They've laid out in very pragmatic terms how to calculate ROI, and I think for me, it's a seminal moment where, in the past, I think thought leadership was quite a vague thing, in which people knew it when they saw it, but they didn't know how to hit it out the park every time. And I think what they do is sort of literally provide a formula for how you can calculate.
And archetypes of different types of thought leadership, etc.
So they kind of define what it is,
Yeah.
how it can make you money, and how much money you can expect it to make.
Yeah.
Which I think in the marketing world, there's been lots of those sort of calculations, but thought leadership has not had that. And thought leadership, whether you like it or not, is a form of marketing.
Yeah.
And that partnership needs to get stronger and stronger, I think.
We need to interview them as well. I feel like speaking to the gallery, we need a road show is what I'm thinking. And take this on the road. You talked about the cost per client click. Am I right in saying that is one of the metrics that you look for?
So one thing we try and develop internally is well, how much have we invested in creating a piece of content,
right?
Yeah, an asset, and then how many client views did we get, and then roll this all up into so we look at our total costs, we look at the total investment we put in, and we divide it by assets and all this, and it's not a precise number, but it gives us an understanding of how we are delivering efficiently, because I think that's the other thing in today's environment, to not be seen as too weighty a team that is just,
Right.
full of academic types taking their time writing and
Yeah, and
reading,
also vanity metrics, right? You're concerned about the people you really want to reach.
Yeah.
And there are other people who might get some goodness from that content, but they're not really your audience. So
yeah, I mean, I think the cost per click sort of calculation, and we've done lots of different calculations internally.
Yeah.
It's all to try and evidence the value.
Yeah.
And I think, while Anthony and Cindy's book is great for the formula they create, there are still a lot of assumptions in there that you have to trust, right? And I think a cost per click is a very crude but effective way of going, well, this is how much you spent and this is what you got.
Yeah.
And then using that to compare it against other sales and marketing techniques.
Yeah.
But the challenge I find is in every business I've worked, and I think this is a challenge that Infosys finds with its clients a lot, and most people won't be surprised to hear, the availability of data is pretty poor. If the data is being collected, it's hard to pull together, or no one's been given the time or the incentive to integrate it all and all that. So a big thing we've been doing, and not just Infosys Knowledge Institute, but in Infosys in general, is getting better and better at pulling all that data together and getting more consistent, clear views across the piece, so that we can start understanding, is this effective? Is it doing what it needs to do? Rather than getting, so we want to get away from the view of thought leadership, and I'm not the only one who said this, I think, in thought leadership, get away from the view that we should be writing about topics and themes and that content strategy towards a content strategy that is focused on who is our audience, what do we want them to do, and how is this content going to make them do that, what do we want them to do or think, and then measuring, how are we going to measure that worked.
No, that's really well said. And there's a tendency to think everybody is, especially companies in the tech space, that everybody is so advanced with their use of data, and sometimes it's hard to see the wood for the trees.
Yeah.
And one other thing I wanted to ask you about quickly, on your LinkedIn, I've seen something called House of Genius.
Yeah.
I have no idea what that is. Tell us about that.
It's a really interesting concept. It was founded in Boulder, Colorado, by a bunch of sort of startup entrepreneurs. It's actually interesting because it really shapes my view of thought leadership as well. It's basically a forum for a entrepreneur to bring an idea to a room of about 12, 15 people, but all of those people are anonymous. And some could be CEOs, some could be VCs, some could be a chef or a taxi driver or whatever. They're not brought because of their job title. They're brought because of their ability to have opinions. And it's basically a reverse Dragon's Den where the entrepreneur doesn't pitch. They bring 2 or 3 problems. And they're given only 7 to 10 minutes to explain their business and the problem they need to overcome. And then you go around the room and the feedback is given. And the feedback, when you give it, you're not allowed, and this is important, you're not allowed to say who you are, what you do, and you're also not allowed to qualify your statement. So you can't say something, well, I've been doing this for 25 years and I know. You have to explain why.
Wow.
But each of those people are only given a minute and a half to give their answer. So it's high pressure, and you cannot repeat something someone's already said. You just say, yes, I agree with that person. I've got nothing more to add. So it forces this real intense thinking because you can't fall back on this, I work for Google, so I know this, or you have to really explain yourself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you need to do with thought leadership as well. You can't just rely on the fact that you come from a big company or that you have done these things. You need to explain to people in the simplest terms. So it's been great. It doesn't run so often anymore. We ran it for about 10 years, about almost 10 years ago now. And it was great at a big startup boom in London. We were running it here and having lots of startups coming through.
I'm really intrigued. I will talk to you about it more. I am conscious that if it was over here, it sounds like a BBC Radio 4 comedy hour somehow. Anyway.
This is the Collective Content Podcast.
This is the Collective Content Podcast.
This is the Collective Content Podcast.
I think this is a good time to segue onto our sort of last section. inevitably about the rise of AI, especially Gen AI in recent years and LLMs. What role do you see for it in your world of content?
I think the best analogy or I've heard, or the metaphor for Gen AI, it comes from one of our team members, Kate Bevan, who herself is a very esteemed journalist and now our
Yep.
commissioning editor. And she described it as, we've got to see Gen AI as a new keyboard. It doesn't take what generative AI does for writing. It doesn't take away the need to think about a strong narrative and something compelling.
Yeah.
What it does help with is a lot of pulling together your research and your data. It can help you. We've now got tools which are analyzing all the stuff we've written in the past. So just our own stuff.
Yeah.
What did we write about this? It saves a lot of time.
We're doing the same thing.
Yeah,
on a smaller level, I think. But
So it saves a lot of time there. It also helps with new ideas. It can be a good ideation tool. But fundamentally, you've still got to come up. It can't really come up with compelling narratives. It can come up with mimics of compelling narratives, but they don't work every time. So I think there's. But we're not just writers, right? We're videographers. We're research analysts. We're data analysts. And actually, we're using AI a lot in our video and audio stuff.
Yeah.
And we're starting to use it more and more in our data analysis and research.
And you mean as a tool, for example, like in editing or in design and cleaning things up? And because there is, people have traditionally talked about that classic uncanny valley with visual AI generated content. But I would say I kind of use the same term for when you read something and it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And I think what we've found across all our clients and for our own content is the risk of anyone going there has so far been one of the main reasons why people are not thinking they can just get Gen AI to create so much. And also experienced content leaders such as yourself who understand the bigger picture and the efficiencies where they're appropriate.
I think we don't use AI to create new visuals, but I think the increase of that is going to make it even more important to have real people involved. And one of our strategies is to get as many of our clients and partners face to face, to have them videoed or talking about their, I would, it's interesting, we talked a lot about writing, but a video interview is so much quicker and easier to do and so much more compelling. And then you can write something off the back of that.
Yeah.
But, writing something and having some AI visuals with that uncanny feel of them, it's kind of, it doesn't really do anything for you because ultimately I'd rather have no visuals. But, really we use vision more and more to prove that we have those relationships with those real people rather than to, from a thought leadership perspective anyway, because that, it's got to be based on people and their experiences and their thoughts,
And it's believable and it's real. And,
authentic.
And AI is the tool to make you better at that rather than creating it from nothing. And then
I do think we're seeing this shift, and you mentioned this in a previous conversation, but do we need more editors? I think we probably need more editors, but I think we also probably need what we call producers, which are rather than writers, but almost producers / project managers who are kind of working within our team. And we've always from the start called our writers producers, because we see them as they own a little business. They own their beat.
Okay.
They have their stakeholders, that they're the service lines or products in Infosys that they are helping create thought leadership for.
Yeah.
And they are working with those teams and their marketing teams to build content strategies and create a stream of assets that come out of that. And they can use Gen AI to help them with the strategy, to help them with the writing, to help them with all of that stuff. But ultimately, it needs to be good enough to meet the strategy.
And are you encouraging them to use certain tools, or are you letting them find their way and hoping to get some sort of
we've kind of passed the finding way stage. So we've done about 2 years of just go experiment and
Yeah.
come back. And we had a series of sessions where people were showing off what they'd used and how they'd learned to use it. But we are now starting to roll out AI platforms
Okay.
that
Anything you
effectively.
can tell us without giving away the crown
I'm
jewels?
not entirely sure. Some of them are built in-house
Okay.
and some are purchased.
Yep.
But I think it's best that I keep that quiet until we.
No. It's we'll
know,
we'll give
um,
you an arm lock or something and get it out of you
Yeah,
afterwards. It's all good.
we'll see if they work, and then we'll. But I think we're entering an era of AI where it's very similar to the many digital waves that you'll have seen before as well. That we're getting to that platform stage where it's not just go to ChatGPT and then go to Claude and then go. It's actually platforms that are bringing all of those LLMs together
Yeah.
and then giving you a process by which to go down this route. Okay,
Right.
build your strategy. Okay, that strategy tells you which content pieces you need and what time you should input your your data. Okay, we'll
Right.
tell you, well, these 5 articles, one should be on these topics. This is the SEO. Okay, use that SEO to write an article that says this. Okay, so it kind of guides you
Yeah.
through all of that.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, you still have to write. You still have to publish something that is based on
Yeah.
the Infosys perspective, supports the Infosys strategy,
Yeah.
and is credible and compelling enough that someone would actually read it. It's not just AI slop,
Yeah, it's incredible hearing this because you're describing there are so many areas where AI can be useful. But we had a content and AI event we held last November, and someone in the audience was actually a copy lead at one of our clients, and he stood up and said, actually, the writing is the last area you want to use this for. There is all these other things which we're
there's loads of
missing.
things.
We're sort of, and you're describing a way forward.
I think that when it first all started a few years ago, I won't lie, I think we were all scared that what was going to happen to our writing. But actually, the reality is there's so many more things it can help with before you even get to the writing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's how we're using it.
Okay, Samad, I think that's a good point to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks. It's been really enjoyable to talk about it, and I look forward to hearing all your other episodes as well.
Good. Well, we're going to be producing more in this series, content leaders, generally at big tech and professional services companies. That's our thing. Please tune into more and look out for our latest events coming up as well. I've been Tony for Collective Content. Thank you.
This was the Collective Content Podcast Sensemaker Sessions. Let us know what you'd like us to make sense of next.